I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off-road. The guy managed the group. He was like, what are you doing in this beautiful car? I'm like, I'm going off-road. He's like, are you sure? Because you can use one of ours. And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network. Today on the James Altucher Show.
The most dangerous negotiation is the one you don't know you're in. In any negotiation process, if you slow it down and you're a little bit more deliberate, you immediately begin to gain the upper hand. You see more opportunities.
Well, you just won this negotiation. Thank you very much.
I love the way Mark Cuban tests people on Shark Tank.
What's a negotiation technique you've seen him use on Shark Tank?
He says, take it or leave it. Look, before you talk to any of the sharks, you either accept or reject my offer right now, and you don't have the opportunity to talk to anybody else.
What's a good response there?
The best response I ever heard was one of the contestants, one of the entrepreneurs, said to him, you wouldn't want me to get pushed around like that if I was negotiating on your behalf.
This is what I usually do in a negotiation. Chris Voss, I am not going to negotiate with you because I've read a series of negotiations you did in your book, Splitting the Difference. Or actually, well, let me get the exact title of the book and the subtitle. I always forget.
Never split the difference.
Never split the difference. Negotiating as if your life depended on it.
Right.
And you were the lead negotiator for the lead international crisis negotiator for the FBI for many years. You worked for the FBI for 24 years.
Right.
You've been in 150 negotiations, often involving life or death. Give me an example of one. There are many examples in the book, of course, and the book's excellent. And by the way, the whole book's about negotiating, the relationship between your hostage negotiations and your more current business of helping people with business negotiations. It's maybe the best book on negotiating I've ever read.
Thank you.
What was an example of like a hostage negotiation?
Well, you know, a lot of the stuff, mostly international kidnappings, and kidnapping is a commodities game. For us, it's horrifying.
Which, by the way, I never would have thought of it that way.
Right, exactly. But in any negotiation, you got to know how the other guy looks at it and how they see themselves. And kidnappers actually see themselves as just hard bargaining commodities guys. And so we're working a case. Steve Santani, a Fox News reporter, gets grabbed in the Gaza Strip. And, I plug into Fox News, and they're very receptive to us being involved. And really what I did as an international kidnapping negotiator was I was a negotiation coach. I coached negotiations all over the world.
Because, and you say coach because they don't want to deal with you. They want to deal with, they don't want to think there's an expert behind. And part of your job is making sure that the person doing the negotiation on your side doesn't appear so clever that it seems like, the police or the FBI or you are behind the scenes.
Right. They got to stay genuine. They got to be true to who they are. And they got to then take the advantage of their natural tendencies. And so we're working a Santani case, and he just disappeared. And the Gaza Strip is, it's a fishbowl. So it's hard for anybody to really disappear there. They initially thought that he was probably dead because they heard nothing from the kidnappers. And Fox, understandably, very concerned about their people. They were phenomenal as far as being concerned for their people, very caring. And then suddenly when the negotiations became engaged, then we started to work a little magic through the media statements. The idea that communication is concession is absurd. Communication is power.
What do you mean communications concessions?
Well, some people are afraid to negotiate because they think that simply by talking you're conceding. And those are weak-minded people. You gain tremendous power by engaging in communication. That gives you an opportunity to really...
Well, how else are you supposed to get the hostage back?
Yeah, exactly. How else are you supposed to do it? And the communication doesn't always have to be direct. I mean, I've always loved to say the most dangerous negotiation is the one you don't know you're in. So we started coaching people on media statements and putting the kidnappers in a bad position by what was being said in the media. Everybody's aware of the media.
And so you would call them cowards as opposed to terrorists, or what would you do?
That's a good point. When we're dealing with terrorists, it's best to paint them as cowards. But the first thing to do is actually to demonstrate some respect in the media, because if you can demonstrate respect, it shows you're worthy of respect. And so you start off not by calling them names, and we actually coach people to say, we're talking to the men that are holding Steve. And that changes the dynamic immediately, and it causes them to deal with you in a different way. The respect reciprocity is extremely strong, and you really gain the upper hand by demonstrating respect first, which a lot of people are afraid to do that, which is exactly why you gain the upper hand. We started demonstrating respect.
And so you call this in some ways, I'm gonna try to link this back to your book in different points. This is part of your labeling, right? Where you're kind of giving them, figuring out what their motives might be, labeling their motives and emotions. So by calling them men who are holding Steve as opposed to terrorists, you're essentially beginning the process of labeling almost.
Right, you're beginning to reframe it. You're definitely trying to reach across without them knowing it and punch emotional buttons that they don't know that you're punching, which is a sign of a great negotiator. I mean, punching an emotional button, you can do it a lot of times in business negotiations in the United States. Happens all the time with the word fair. Fair is a great emotional button pusher.
I want to get to fair in a second, but I want to hear how this negotiation with the Fox News reporter turned out.
All right, so then the attitude from the kidnappers changed immediately. They switched more over into business negotiators, and then we asked for some proof of life, which they came close to hitting properly. But we actually, it's the fine details. They didn't come back with the exact right answers.
Can I ask, and I'm sorry I interrupt a lot.
Every time
I get curious.
Yeah.
So when you say you ask for proof of life, as you point out, there's two ways to do it. You can ask for a fact, like, what's this guy's middle name? Or you can ask more open-ended, what you call a calibrated question.
Right. You
how
really
do I
have
know?
read the book. Look at you.
Of course. I want to be a better negotiator, and I'm preparing for you, a great negotiator. So you could ask, how do I know he's alive? Which is a little more open-ended, and it kind of outsources more work to them as opposed to just getting a fact.
Right, exactly. It burdens them with the process. And when you're dealing with a dangerous negotiator, tough negotiator, you burden them with the process. I mean, I'd say anybody dealing with Donald Trump, start asking him open-ended questions, get out of the fight. A fighter wants to fight, and they're caught off guard when you don't fight. So burden them with the process, and, how do we know somebody's alive? How do we know if we pay you that he's gonna come out?
And so what did you ask specifically to get proof of life here?
Well, they offered some very specific questions, sort of like security type questions. And so we provided those because we wanted to see what the process was going to bring to us. And when they came close but didn't answer them specifically, instead of capitulating and saying, "Oh, that's close enough," we said, "No, that's not right. We're not going to proceed."
And because your assumption is, and this is kind of a theme throughout many of your negotiations, your assumption is that slowing down the process is not necessarily dangerous for you. It's not like they're going to cut off an ear and send it to you to say, put up or shut up. You're still treating them with respect, but you're extending the process because maybe statistically, it doesn't go badly for you this way.
Right. Well, we refer to that as the delay that saves time. A lot of times in any negotiation process, if you slow it down and you're a little bit more deliberate, you immediately begin to gain the upper hand. You see more opportunities.
That's because I thought that was a really fascinating point in the book, that they need you just as much as you need them. It's not as if you have to be scared that suddenly they're going to disappear, because they actually kidnap the person for a reason that they need.
Right. And it's a sole buyer. I mean, it's a buyer's market and a kidnapping game. You got a seller who can only sell them to one person on the entire planet. There's tremendous leverage in there if you recognize the leverage. And so we just simply recognize that leverage and learn how to use the emotions to our advantage. And then it moved extremely quickly after that point. They realized that, for example, that they no longer had the upper hand on a very subconscious level. And Steve and his cameraman were out, and just about it was probably less than 24 hours after Proof of Life. It went really fast.
So in other words, you said that this Proof of Life wasn't good enough, so you were starting to be suspected. Were they afraid you were going to just go silent?
No, when I think they felt that they were dealing with somebody that wasn't a pushover, and that was a key. And that I was a little surprised at how quickly it went after that. And I think in many cases, a power negotiator, when suddenly they're met with their match and it's not a fight, they're very awkward with that. They don't know exactly how to deal with that. I mean, I liken it very much to the way the Speaker of the House has been dealing with Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't really want to engage with Paul Ryan that much anymore, and I think Paul Ryan has really outmaneuvered him in a number of ways by not being combative. And I think it's a very close analogy. And anytime a combative negotiator is being sort of tied in knots, but they don't know that you're doing it to them, they grow weary of it very quickly, and they don't want to engage anymore because they only see open combat.
So in some sense, when you pushed back on their Proof of Life, you were tying them in knots to some extent, and they got confused or something. And did you pay money? Did you pay a ransom?
I don't think we had nothing to do with whether or not. Sometimes it was necessary to coach payments because we would try to draw them out in the open in a sting operation, if you will. And I never saw any evidence whatsoever that anyone paid anything for Steve and his cameraman. There were rumblings after the facts that Fox may have. I don't think they did. I didn't see any evidence of it. I think the kidnappers just found themselves in a position where it was bad for them to continue to hold those two hostages, and they needed to get out of it. And so they found a face-saving way to make a deal and let them go.
So let me put this in a business context, and I like the example you use in your book. You went to a car dealership, you saw a car you liked, and the salesman said $36,000, and then you kicked into gear. It was almost like it almost seemed like you were just having fun for the heck of it. But so I'll pretend to be the salesman, okay, and I just want to reenact that negotiation. So sticker price is $36,000.
Right. And it's worth that. I mean, it's beautiful. I love it. I love it that it's one of the only ones around here.
Thank you, sir.
And I love it. I'm sorry, I just can't pay that.
All right, so what can you pay then?
Well, I could do 30. I could do $30,000. That's what I have for it.
I'm sorry, sir. The blue book says $36,000. My manager won't let go lower than $36,000.
And I don't blame you, because the fact that you're even still talking to me at all is wonderfully generous of you. I mean, and I feel really bad because I only have 30, and it's worth $36,000. It's beautiful. I love it. The blue book is that. I mean, it's probably a bargain at 36. But how am I supposed to do that?
I love that. How am I supposed to do that? Like, just the continual outsourcing to the. Okay, so then the guy went into his manager, came back to you, and said, "You win. It's $34,500."
Right. And I said, "Oh wow, you are so generous. I mean, it's wonderful. $34,500 is a great price. It's actually worth $36,000 every dime. It's beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. But if I can only do $30,000, how am I supposed to do $34,500?"
So I guess. So what you're kind of saying is that you're not negotiating, you're not lying. Like 30,000 really is it. Like if you moved up at all, he would basically say there's a negotiation, and then he would try to find something in the middle. He would split the difference, in other words, the opposite of your title. But you, by sticking to 30,000, he has to keep going back to the manager. What if he really couldn't go lower than 34,000 at this point?
Well, that's exactly what I want to find out. I mean, the point of negotiation is find out how much money's on the table. How far can I push the other side without insulting them? keeping them engaged, and what we're horrified at the other side saying, the worst thing you could ever say is like, look, if you want it, you have to pay that. And that's the answer I ultimately want. I want you to go to that point because we're still talking, you're not mad at me, and I have pushed you to your limit. And I'll say one or two more things just to make sure that your position is firm, and then I have a decision to make.
So if he had just stood his ground there and said, listen, I can't even go back to my manager on this, 34,500 is it. Otherwise, have a nice day. I just can't do anything. What would you have done at that point?
Well, then I prepare to end on a positive note. Man, we've got almost a surefire way to the very last probe is for me to look at you and say, it sounds like there's nothing you could do. It sounds like you're powerless at this point. Now, nobody on the planet wants to admit that they're powerless. Mm-hmm. That is like the worst, most horrific thing. And I've said this in a really nice way. And also nobody likes to say yes because you don't know what you're letting yourself in for, and you don't want to say, yes, I'm powerless. So at that point in time, I know you're going to hesitate, you're going to search your mind. You'll maybe ask me for another day or two if you actually can't find anything at that point in time. But if you have any way to give yourself power back, which this statement is completely taken away from you, you don't want to say, yes, I'm powerless. So if you look at me then at that point in time, say, yeah, that's it. Then I know I push you as far as I can. And we're still talking by the nature of your response. We're still talking. You haven't burst into flame and screamed at me and insulted my family and demanded that I leave. I push you as far as I can without actually hurting our relationship. And again, now I've got a decision to make. And a number of people, we've made a bunch of deals at the very end by saying, it sounds like there's nothing else I could say. It sounds like you're powerless here. And they went, okay,
Would you ever say that in a life or death situation? Like, is there a hostage situation where you've said that?
We keep going in a hostage situation. We'll ultimately get into the bargaining phase and a back and forth. And we'll want to talk long enough so that we know what the other side actually looks like when they're telling the truth. Because, you can't sue a kidnapper. You can't threaten to take him to court.
And you can't really risk the kidnapper killing the hostage.
Right. When we know what risk looks like, I can begin to predict, if I talk to you long enough, what you sound like when you're bluffing and what you sound like when you really mean it. And specificity is a great gauge.
What do you mean by that?
If a kidnapper says, look, if you don't pay, then he's going to die. That's kind of vague. It doesn't tell me when, where, or how. But if the kidnapper says, if you don't pay, we're going to kill him tomorrow, it says when it's going to happen and who's going to do it.
But you also mentioned in the book, in 100% of the cases, except one, which you refer to in the book, in 100% of the cases, when they say, I'm going to kill the hostage tomorrow, they never do it tomorrow.
Yeah, and because we've listened to them long enough, and what's the specificity? Like, sometimes they never said when the timeline gets started. We know what vague threats sound like, and in a minute you start adding any sort of specificity to a threat, and it's the same with business negotiation. Like, if you don't make this deal, I'm out of here. Well, maybe the guy might mean, I'm out here to go down the hall, to go to the bathroom, just to take a break. I mean, people that make threats always leave themselves an out. And you look at the threat and you say, in a business deal, how many outs have they left themselves here? How many ways can they not carry through the threat and say, oh, well, I never said I was leaving. I just said, I'm out of here. Or I never said I would never talk to you again. And there are a lot of bare-knuckle business negotiators that understand, the idea of a vague threat and demonstrative slam the hands down on the table and huff and puff and go outside to get a cup of coffee that they plan to go get anyway.
So I want to get more into the specific techniques, but I have two more general questions on your background and how you got into this. But what's the most scared you've ever been in the middle of a hostage negotiation? And we can also get to business negotiations later, but I'm really curious where you were put to the test emotionally in a hostage situation.
Well, while one was going on, I mean, one of the first cases I ever worked was a kidnapping in the Philippines. I'm blanking on his name right now, but it'll come back to me.
The Burnham?
No, before that, Jeff Schilling.
Okay.
All right, and that was when I realized, this is going to sound stupid, but terrorists got moms. Terrorists have moms.
I like that as a topic, as a title of an article. Terrorists have moms.
Terrorists have moms, and so every terrorist on the planet, no matter what we think of him, had a mom, which means his initial view of women in the world was started by his interaction with his mother. He might not have had sisters, might not have had girlfriends, might not have had daughters. Every one of those things, when they come into a man's life, begins to change his perspective. And they'll often say a man's view of the world, a recent observation on Trump was, his perspective for his wife and his perspective for his daughter, two different things. His perspective for his mother, the first thing he started out with. So every terrorist's got a mom. And we're working a Schilling case, and we'd already passed through some important touch points, and we'd finally pushed them to the point where they'd had enough. And we'd actually already learned that the leader of the group was susceptible to the mother idea. We'd punched his button several months earlier by discussing Schilling's mom, and he reacted like, oh my God, his mother knows about this?
So what did you say specifically?
Well, they were threatening that they were torturing him. We didn't think they were. But
why didn't you think that?
The vagueness of the threats. Again, there wasn't enough specificity to the threats. It was a throwaway, and we perceived it as a way to punch our buttons. And my boss at the time, Gary Nessner, said, you know what, find a way to mention Schilling's mother's concern for him here. And I remember at the time thinking, that's the dumbest idea I have ever heard. A terrorist is going to care about this guy's mother? I mean, please. But, my boss had great insight, and I didn't see any downside to it. And in the middle of the negotiation, we told the terrorist, we said, look, Jeff's mom's worried about him. And this murdering sociopathic terrorist literally said, his mother knows about this? You tell his mother he's okay. And that was an emotional, quick, instantaneous response because we hit an emotional button. So much later in the case, they finally came up with a threat where I remember going to bed that night thinking tomorrow morning Jeff Schilling's head could be separated from his body. And what they'd done is they'd said, we were going to execute Jeffrey for his sins. And there were two critical words in there. Execute. An executioner is not guilty of murder. So if an executioner is carrying
in
out,
their mind, they're not.
They're carrying out the will of a recognized authority. If you're an executioner, so the part of that statement was removing the responsibility for killing Jeff off their shoulders. And then the second thing that really bothered us is they said for his sins. And the minute you begin to connect someone with God or that they've sinned, sinning is worse than doing wrong. Sinning is the ultimate wrong, which justifies the execution. So it was that point in time that we decided to play the mom card again because terrorists got moms. And we flew Jeffrey's mother to the Philippines and engaged in a very heavy media campaign, tremendous visibility for his mother, pictures of Jeffrey as a little boy, a lot of things like that because terrorists care about the media. Donald Trump cares about the media. He said all publicity is good publicity. He doesn't feel that way now because there's been plenty of bad publicity come out that he doesn't like. So there's always bad publicity, and terrorists care about bad publicity. And with this intense media campaign in the Philippines, and the Philippine media loves these sorts of issues, the murdering sociopathic terrorists came out of the media and said, because Jeffrey's mother's here, we're not going to kill him. Terrorists got moms, and we knew that was a way to punch their buttons. And ultimately, at that point in time, we had them so off guard and so disorganized that very shortly thereafter, less than a week after that, Jeffrey walked away.
And you didn't have to pay anything then. There was no ransom.
Not dime one. Because
I seem to remember.
We did it to him.
Oh no, I'm confusing that case with the Jose Escobar case where you just wore them down so much that eventually they all left, because a commodity declines in value over time.
Exactly.
If it's just being stored.
And as soon as you take them out of how long they expect the kidnapping to take. The first time I really began to realize that kidnapping negotiation applied directly to business was when I first learned kidnapping negotiation. And my mentor, one of my mentors, Dennis Braden, phenomenal human being, he said, look, whatever country you go into, you have to understand that the terrorists are going to have an opening ask. They're going to have an amount that they want to settle for from the family of the company, and they're going to have a certain number of days that they're going to expect this to last. And every country is going to be different, but within that country, it's going to be very consistent. And I thought to myself, this is a market for people. This is a market price for human beings, and this is a turnover of inventory of human beings.
What about in cases, though, where there's been long, extended kidnappings, like Terry Anderson in Beirut, for instance?
Right. Because
6 years, right?
The market has adapted. Terry Anderson, who's as far as I'm concerned, is an American hero who I've had the pleasure of meeting. When he was released, he met his 6-year-old daughter for the first time. His fiancée was pregnant when he got grabbed. And that went into an extended period of time, but their market had slowly adapted and evolved because Hezbollah put up an infrastructure that they controlled, and they could hold people for longer and longer periods of time. And then depending upon the combativeness of the hostage and the willingness of the other side to interact and negotiate, they eventually extended their market timing so that they could hold somebody for that long. And any kidnapping organization, the longer they are in business, the FARC in Colombia holds people for 10 years. They'll come to that eventually when they build their infrastructure to be able to hold on to the commodity.
So how did you first get into this? Like, even just hearing these stories makes me feel anxiety. Like, you put yourself into that on purpose, and obviously you did a great thing. You're an American hero. But how did you get into this?
Well, I was an FBI agent. I'd been on the SWAT team.
Why were you an FBI agent?
I was trying to find steady work.
But it's kind of cool, right? I'm in the FBI.
Yeah, no, I was a cop. Always wanted to be a cop. I was a cop in Kansas City, Missouri. Loved the job. Became interested in federal law enforcement. I can tell. I know that my accent gives me away. I'm from Iowa. I definitely have the Iowa accent, right?
I can never tell.
So, but I'd become an FBI agent because I got interested in federal law enforcement, and I found out that sometimes federal guys got to travel around the world. And I had never been to Mexico at that point in time in my life, and I'd seen Canada from across the border. No international travel. And that intrigued me. I didn't know that I was going to enjoy it that much. And then the opportunity to do that and to take on challenging stuff. In hindsight, I remember hearing about terrorist groups, and I felt very strongly about combating terrorism. I thought terrorists should be in jail. And I think if terrorists, domestic or international, there's one of two places for them, and one of them is jail, and the other is not political office. Which some end up in, interestingly enough.
Well, but you make a good point. Like, fighting against terrorism or terrorists is not the same as fighting another country. So you're fighting you're not fighting a political organization that has an arsenal of weapons that fights in some pseudo-traditional way. You're fighting against people who are using techniques like kidnapping to achieve their means, or terrorist threats to achieve their means. And what we have on our side is, I guess, money and negotiation ability and media.
Right. On our side, we've got a system of justice we believe in, and that's a whole separate track we can get into easily. But I believe very strongly in the American system of justice. But we've got a system that we've set up, and there are criminals on the other side that decide that they want to kill and kidnap and claim that it's on behalf of some sort of political grievance. And 99% of the time, it's not. It's because they're criminals and they're thugs. And it's a way for them to be in business and easier way for them to get guns. So yeah, I wanted to combat terrorism. I believe in the American system. I know that sounds, maybe that's a cliche, but it's part. It's actually, it all winds into I believe in good, solid negotiation.
And what do you feel was at this point? So I know you were involved in about 150 negotiations. What was your worst failure where you feel like if you had done something a little bit differently, a life would have been saved, and in retrospect now, a life wasn't saved?
Well, in the Burnham-Sabero case,
this is again in the Philippines.
Yeah, it was right after the Schilling case, and I felt that we were inadequate. I didn't feel that we did anything wrong. At that point in time, when at the very end of that case, 2 out of 3 of the last kidnapped victims were killed in a botched rescue attempt. Scout Rangers came accidentally across a terrorist encampment where the hostages were, just opened fire indiscriminately. And Deborah Yap, the final Philippine hostage, who we were looking out for, we were doing the best to save her life, and Martin Burnham were both killed in the friendly fire, and Gracia Burnham was wounded. And it wasn't that we did anything wrong, in my view. It says we weren't enough. We didn't know enough. And in every kidnap negotiator's life, there comes a point in time, probably when things go sideways, and it just, it was the universe not taking it in the right direction. Not necessarily that we made a mistake, but we were inadequate. And at that point in time was my decision, like, all right, either I get out of this or we get better. And that's actually when I started collaborating with the guys at Harvard for us to try to get better, because I felt like we did everything we knew how to do at that time. We had an internal review. We looked over every decision that we made, and nobody had any issues with any of the decisions we'd made along the lines.
Well, it seemed like, if I remember that case specifically, you were unaware that there was another negotiator also trying to get their release, I guess family members or something. And it seems like when there's a market that you didn't know about, that's going to unfairly hurt you.
Right. And I didn't fully understand the idea that we were dealing with an organization and that the most important people were probably the deal killers, not the deal makers. People that want to snipe your deal, or they wanted to do something on the side. You didn't account for them. And it was at that point in time I thought, okay, all right, we just got to get better,
So at Harvard is also when you started to realize, hey, this is very similar to business negotiation. And I want to kind of get into now some of the specific techniques that work in both. And one of the first techniques you talk about is mirroring. Maybe you can describe that a little, and then I have some questions on that.
Sure, and mirroring is different than what most people think of it. Mirroring is just repeating the last 1 to 3 words of what someone has said. I'm not trying to mirror your affect. I'm not trying to mirror your words, and I'm definitely not trying to mirror your energy level.
Well, you're mirroring the words a little bit.
Well, I'm repeating the words exactly. But for example, if you're from Louisiana and you talk like a Cajun, I'm not trying to mirror how you talk. I'm not trying to adopt that accent, or even your adjectives or your rate of speech. I'm not mirroring any of those things to a hostage negotiator.
Could it be a paraphrase, or does it have to be the exact words?
Paraphrase is another skill. It's a good question. Paraphrase is great for clarification and great for demonstrating understanding. But mirroring is really, I'm trying to keep you talking. I'm trying to keep you expanding. I'm trying to keep you going. And it's actually a great way. It's a great test of a lot of things. I can test your position with a mirror, and you're not going to know that's what I'm doing.
I'm not going to know that's what you're doing.
I'm not going to know. You're not going to know it's a very nice mirror there. Very well. You're showing off a little bit here.
Well, see, you caught it right away, so it wasn't that good.
Well, I usually do that to the other people. I'm actually a sucker for mirrors. I'm a natural born assertive, and assertives love mirrors. I've had people keep me talking through extended periods of time before I found out that they were mirroring me. And we think there's 3 basic types to conflict, which is equals negotiation, and all 3 types like mirroring. It draws them out. They don't feel attacked by it. They feel good about the interaction. So we start, when I'm teaching, it's just repeat the last 1 to 3 words of what somebody's just said. And then if you really want to be a show-off, you'll pick out 1 to 3 words within what they've said that you want to clarify. And you'll listen forward and you'll wait. It's one of those things that a friend of mine, Ned Colletti, is a former GM of the Los Angeles Dodgers, fantastic general manager of a baseball team. And he says, in every 2-hour conversation, there's going to be 90 seconds of solid gold in the middle. It's going to tell you everything about the deal.
That's really interesting. So in every 2-hour conversation, there's going to be 90 seconds of solid gold.
Right.
And so what's an example? So he's involved, obviously, in these almost ludicrous negotiations where a guy hitting a wooden bat wants $60 million.
Barry Bonds. He negotiated the Barry Bonds deal with the San Francisco Giants. Yeah.
So what might be the 90 seconds of gold there?
Well, there's going to be a change in tone of voice, or there's going to be a change in an adjective or change in a characterization. And he would always say, an agent might say, I think I can get 20 and 10 versus I've got 20 and 10, or I think he's worth 20 and 10. Whatever the vernacular is, it's going to be what's led up to that. And there's going to be a change in tone because I've got 20 and 10. They're going to say it very much like the late night FM DJ.
Oh, yeah, I didn't understand that, actually. So you say almost the very first thing you say is, in a negotiation, you use your late night FM DJ voice. What is that voice? Because I tried to think to myself, how do I sound like a late night FM DJ? I couldn't think of it.
Well, it's like one contract negotiation I was in where they wanted a work for hire clause. I simply said, we don't do work for hire.
So, okay, like if let's say I'm negotiating for a salary increase, and I'm making $50,000 and I want to make $55,000. what might I say in that voice? Like, I can't work for 50,000 anymore.
Well, I can only take 55,000.
All right. And why does that work? Why does the late night FM DJ voice work?
You know, it's kind of freaky the way it works because the other side gets the feeling that you are rock solid.
And you're like really serious.
Yeah. And it's a way of, without angering them, saying this is it. You know, it's a way to imply take it or leave it. On this point, and I do this exercise all the time in my classes at USC and at Georgetown. I did it just 2 nights ago at Georgetown. Now, when I use that tone of voice, since you will feel that there is nowhere to go, your thought processes will almost come to a complete halt. And you will stop, and inside you will be like, oh my God, where do I go? You'll be mystified.
So if someone was using that voice against you, you would recognize it, right? And then what would you do to react?
Well, more than likely what I'm going to do if that was done to me is I'd mirror it. And when I mirrored it, if, for example, somebody said, we don't do work for hire in that voice, I'd go, work for hire? And if they said, work for hire, that's no expansion, it's the same tone of voice. But if there's softness in that position, and when I go work for hire, if the other side says, yeah, it's just really difficult for us to do work for hire, well, that's an expansion. And now that I know there's some room there's some softness.
And then you could do the calibrated question like, well, how can we get something equivalent to work for hire in here?
Right. How do we work this out? How do we take it into account?
So you make it as broad as possible rather than what I said. You just were more general than what I said.
Right. Or, the flip side, if you don't want to ask a question, then I could use a label and I'd say, like, it sounds like there's something more here. And they'll react to that because there are some people that just don't like answering questions until they've thought 9 million different possibilities through before the answer. And I need a response now. And it's one of the differences that we bring because you need questions answered in every business negotiation, but asking the question is probably not the best way to get the answers. And a hostage negotiator and these hostage negotiation techniques are designed to trigger information voluntarily without making the other side feel cornered, which keeps the relationship going and makes you want to continue to deal with someone.
Let's stop to take a quick break. We'll be right back. It seems like the hard thing in a hostage negotiation from your side is that you can't just say, well, kill him then, like, we don't care.
Right.
Like, you can't really, there's no walking away from the negotiation like in a business negotiation.
No, there's no walking away from the negotiation, but I can imply that if you're not going to talk with me, we're not going to talk. And I can also imply that if you get angry with me, we're not going to talk. Or I'll say, if you start getting angry with me, I'll say something to the effect of, look, I can't hear you when you're yelling at me.
Right. So, and the idea there is that they still need something. The whole reason you're talking anyway is because they need something from you, so they want to continue the conversation.
Right. If somebody's yelling at you, they want to continue the conversation. And if they raise their voice, it means they really want to get through to you. So there's this great handcuffing effect of saying, I can't hear you when you yell at me. They realize that their yelling is counterproductive to what they want, and they have a choice. Do I get what I want, or do I continue to beat this person up? Well, ultimately, I'm beating you up because of what I want, and that will win out.
So I have some basic questions, like, and this is some of the things you say in the book run contrary, as you know, to many advice and negotiation books.
So you should buy my book.
Exactly. I am recommending your book. So like anchoring, for instance. So a lot of advice is let the other person throw out the first number. But I have found in my own business negotiation that I want to have control of that first number. And in your book seems to agree with that. But a lot of typical advice is let them throw out the first numbers because you might throw out something too low, for instance.
Well, yeah. I mean, I like letting the other side go first. I mean, there's a lot of back and forth on this, a lot of back and forth on it. A lot of it is stylistic. I know that in our interactions, if I've gone too high too soon, it makes deals go away. A really bad philosophy that I think a lot of people believe in is I've never lost money on a deal I didn't make. Well, that's not necessarily true because you're not counting the amount of money you're losing by not making those deals.
Wait, let me process that. I never lost money on a deal I didn't make. So they're saying like if they walk away from the deal, they're not going to lose money on it.
Right. And that's why those people like to throw out high numbers early. And in reality, a high number is really a test to the other side, and a lot of people don't see that. A high anchor will make people walk away and not talk anymore. They're not invested in the deal. They want a number early on. They don't want to work that hard. They're asking you for a price. And, if you throw a price that's too high too soon, you've missed what could be on the table. Plus, price is very emotional. As soon as somebody starts to throw a price at, the other side is thinking like, well, this is what I'm worth. Well, if your thought is this is what I'm worth, you're getting emotional. So prices, and it's one of the things about every negotiation that every negotiation's emotional.
So you're saying then let try to get them to throw out the first price. So let me ask you a question. So this is what I usually do in a negotiation is I'll say something to the effect of, and you could tell me if this is a bad idea or a good idea. I'll say something to the effect of, listen, this is like a grandmaster of chess playing an amateur, and I'm the amateur. I don't really know your industry
Everybody
so well.
that says that is actually very dangerous, so I appreciate the fact that you're trying to diminish your abilities.
Right, so I'm trying to diminish my abilities, and I'll say, listen, I don't know your industry. You need to tell me how to think about this. What's your advice on what I should be asking for?
Well, ranges are very good. A lot of times, I want to trigger a number from the other side because I can only push them so far on price anyway. And what I'm really after is what can they give me that's non-price related that's exceptionally valuable. And you're going to have something that you haven't thought of because you don't know everything about me. And I want to trigger that. And a lot of times it's visibility. A lot of times it's access. A lot of times it's marketing. If you've got a publication or you're affiliated with a group that has access to a publication. I did a talk for National Contract Management Association in Massachusetts. And they couldn't pay me a fee. And through the conversation, I found out they could buy a book for everybody that attended. The national chapter wanted to help them, and the national chapter had a magazine. So we can place an article in a national chapter that has tremendously wide visibility, and the person that wrote it from the local chapter gets visibility. The national chapter gets a speaker for the local chapter, and nobody spent a dime. And they've got a magazine that they got to put good content in anyway.
Well, that's a really important point that you're looking at not only what financial you can ask for, but all the non-cash assets you can that are potentially on the list. They might not even be thinking that way. They might be thinking, well, all we can afford is $5,000 for this guy. But you have this whole list of other things that you could potentially ask for.
Right. And so I start triggering that right away by throwing out ideas. I might throw a high range, but I want to look as if I'm as flexible as possible from the very beginning, and I really want to work with you. Now, if you still want just a number and you don't want to talk about flexibility, then I immediately know that you're not going to be a great business partner.
But what about if both sides? So you're waiting for a number or a range or something, and they're also aware of this advice. They're waiting for a number range. How do you get the other side to throw out the first number?
Sometimes it's a little bit of a game where you go first, I go first, you go first. And then I'll just simply look, I'll say, and I've said this, look, it seems like you've got a range in mind. It seems like you've got limits here. But I find people to be very responsive to the range idea. We are overly conditioned in the business world now not to throw out a number. And if I ask you for a number, you're going to dodge it. If you ask me for a number, I'm going to dodge that as well.
I think also you vaguely mention in the book, or you sort of mention maybe not get the other side to throw out a number or even a range, but a method of deriving a number. So like I can ask you if I'm negotiating with you and we don't always throw out a number, I could say, how are you going to come up with a number to value my business, for instance?
Exactly. That's another. How questions are great questions. They can be a way to qualify or disqualify depending upon how the question is phrased. If I say, how can we make this work? Then I know right away, if you begin to collaborate with me on that, there's a pretty good chance we're going to work something out. If you say to me, how do I know what you're going to teach is going to work? You're actually looking to disqualify me. And I need to know that as soon as possible because I want to close out positively and I want to move on. So how questions are very powerful, and you need to look at the words that are followed on as to whether or not they're trying to engage or disqualify. And if they're disqualifying, then fine. Like, there's something about this doesn't work for you. We need to part company positively, because if I'm talking to you at all, that means you're in my world, and I'm going to have to live with the consequences of whether or not you like me or not.
Well, okay, so let's look at those situations. Let's say two business partners are negotiating a split,
Right.
and like they're separating their company, and or one's buying the other out or whatever, and they hate each other,
Right,
And
which often happens.
There's a lot of emotions involved. How do you deal with someone you hate who hates you?
I'll get an intermediary in to talk me down. And that's what we do in a lot of our coaching. We're coaching several transactions that are like that right now. Now, I knew as a hostage negotiator, now you could probably say as a scientist, when there are negative feelings, the identification of negative feelings diminishes them. There's some scientific evidence right now that actually shows that that's in fact the case. And there's this fine line between identifying and denying. And I make a real big point of always saying, look, if you didn't like me and I were to say, look, I don't want you to think I'm a jerk, that would be a denial, and it would make things worse.
So wait, if I start the negotiation saying I don't want you to think I'm a jerk,
Right.
that's not
That's
good.
a denial. I don't want you to think, or I don't want to seem like. And the denial is different than the identifying. And if we're talking, I say, look, I'm sure it seems like I'm a jerk. I'm sure it looks like that I don't care about you at all. I'm sure it seems like that I have really treated you badly over the years. Now, that's just identification, not denial. And instead of reinforcing that, the science now shows us that diminishes those negative feelings every single time.
Wow.
And it works. Most people are scared to do it, and that's why they want to deny it. And that's why, my experience is every time I do that it made it worse. Well, you didn't realize you actually said, I don't want you to think.
So when you take the emotions out of it, like, and you're starting to deflate the emotions there with the agreeing of the emotions, but not the denying of the emotions, how do you then move from there to fair?
And I'd like to point also, I'm not agreeing. I'm identifying. I never said I have been a jerk. I'd say, sure, it seems like I've been a jerk. And we use that really proactively.
And you say it about yourself, though. You don't say, it seems like you think I'm a jerk.
Exactly. Exactly.
What's the difference there?
I'm showing fearlessness. I'm showing appreciation. I'm showing that I'm not the least bit rattled by it. I'm not worried by it. And showing fearlessness in the face of adversity is a great way to inspire confidence in you from the other side. And that's my intention. And then I'm also trying to show, like, look, you can call me on some stuff and I'm not going to be scared of it. And at some point in time, that actually increases your trust factor in me, because I never said I was going to be on your side. But as soon as you think that you can count on what I say, you don't have a problem with me not being on your side. All you want to know is whether or not I have the ability to back up my word. And then I'm not afraid of any negativity, and I want to work on it. And that makes deals, because deals break down after agreement. And really where money is made or lost is after agreement and implementation. And we're going to have problems, and I'm going to need you to know you can come to me with problems and we'll fix them. That's what I'm really driving at, that I'll always be a good partner. And a lot of, I love the way Mark Cuban tests people on Shark Tank, because he seems like a tough negotiator, and what he's really doing is he knows it's a tough business world, and if you can hold your own with him in a negotiation on a Shark Tank, that means that you can hold your own for him when you're in business together.
What's a negotiation technique you've seen him use on Shark Tank?
He says, take it or leave it. Look, before you talk to any of the other sharks, you either accept or reject my offer right now, and you don't have the opportunity to talk to anybody else.
What's a good response there?
And the best response I ever heard was one of the contestants, one of the entrepreneurs, said to him, you wouldn't want me to get pushed around like that if I was negotiating on your behalf.
I like that.
And Cuban just went, okay. And you passed the test. You're a great ambassador for me now if you could stand up respectfully and not get pushed around. I thought it was a great response. And I've always loved the way that he's negotiated, because he knows that it's a tough world out there. You want to be able to engage in conflict without being combative, and say no without, screaming at the other person or losing your control.
Right, so getting back to, like, you're negotiating with someone where there's emotions involved, you've toned down your emotions, you've kind of deflated them a little bit. What's next?
Well, at that point in time, now I start to work on the positives, which is counterintuitive. because most people want to start out with the positives without having dealt with the negatives. Let me get the negatives out of the way. Now I can grow the positives. And so in terms of the future. So two partners that are breaking up. All right, so how do we make this deal from where we are now, where we both have secured the best future possible for us?
So again, throwing out the open-ended how question.
Yeah,
how it
question.
seems like the critical thing. Mirroring, how, getting rid of the negatives first.
At some point in time, your how is going to be where you make a lot of ground if you don't have solutions up to that point in time that haven't already presented themselves. And for implementation's sake, you need the other side to come up with the ideas.
Well, what if they say, I don't know how, you tell me how?
And I'd say, well, it seems like, and then I'll throw out a possibility. And I want to see whether or not you embrace it. And it's a little bit of understanding the difference between that's right and you're right. Because now at this point in time, if I'm throwing out ideas, I need you to say that's right instead of you're right.
Okay, let me ask you about that, because in the book, you also say you encourage the method of getting them to say no first. And then in the very next chapter, you encourage them to get to say that's right. So when do you want someone to say no?
Well,
first?
if I need to sort of wake them up, if I need to get them a little more aware of what's going on at the moment, and a great question is, do you want me to fail? Do you want to leave money on the table? It's really kind of the opposite of all the yes trap questions that everybody springs on us all the time.
Like, what's a yes trap question?
Would you like to make more money?
So like kind of a slick sales thing.
Right. Most yeses are little breadcrumbs that are leading us into a bear trap.
So like in the car salesman case, instead of saying something like, look, would you really like to do a deal here? You might say something like, I don't know, would it be good for you if I just walk out of here and never come back?
Or is doing a deal a bad idea?
Okay, is negotiating a bad idea here?
Yeah, is this ridiculous? I mean, I caught Jack Welch off guard with one of these, with a no question. He's signing books, and I look at him. I want him to come speak in my class at USC. And I got to get his contact information to find out what his calendar is. And I got to get to his personal assistant. And so I walk up to him, and he doesn't know me from Adam. At a book signing, I could be a stalker, I could be a homeless guy in a nice suit. He doesn't know who the heck I am. And I just look at him and say, is it a ridiculous idea for you to come and speak to the course I teach at University of Southern California? And he looked up high and left, and he got this really stern look on his face, and he froze. And he got this look on his face like he was furious. And then and then he didn't move. And then I thought, he just had a stroke. I thought I just killed Jack Welch. But he stared really hard up and high to his left for, it seemed like an eternity. It must have only been 5 seconds. And then he looks back at me and he gives his personal assistant contact information.
That's so funny because, as opposed to saying, will you speak
right.
At my USC thing where you're looking for a yes,
right.
You kind of positioned it where it was like he kind of almost didn't know whether to say no or yes. He couldn't decipher the question almost.
Well, I want him to think the word no. Mm-hmm. No, it's not ridiculous, because there's an emotional reaction that happens when we say no. We are protected. We center ourselves. We don't worry about what we've let ourselves in for. I took an idea from Jim Camp, Start With No. His book was make the other side comfortable feeling no. And we started experimenting like, well, if they're comfortable, if they can't say no, what happens if they do say no? And we found out that every single time people say no, they feel protected. And if they feel protected, they're more willing to listen.
But this seems a little contrary to what's called
absolutely
the yes ladder. Like when
absolutely.
You're selling something,
yep.
You get somebody to say some easy yeses in a row, and
right.
then you make them more and more complex. And the same thing with interrogation. If I'm interrogating you because I suspect you're a spy or something, I might get you to say some simple yeses, and then the questions get harder, and I see how your body changes and so on. So again, it seems like there's a lot of focus in these different techniques of getting people to say yes, but you're saying no is actually more important.
Yeah, you know what? And that might have worked 50 years ago. And we have all been so hammered by this over and over and over again that I've never seen anybody not pull back and get defensive the first time I try to pull a yes out of them. Because we're like battered children with yes. So a battered child doesn't matter. You're trying to hug them, they still flinch because they're used to being hit.
So, like an example of the battered child, what would you do with a battered child?
Well, just take it. First of all, stop doing that. Stop doing what scares them. Move one, stop doing the bad stuff. And move two has actually been, what happens when people say no. And we found out that they feel protected. I mean, we have field tested this, and it works across cultures. The cultures that are stereotypes for never saying no, and those stereotypes are basically the Arab culture and the Asian culture. And I get these guys to say no all the time.
But like how? What's a way?
Have you given up on this project? No. Do you want us to fail? No. Do you want this to go nowhere? No. Because they were triggering a no on a couple levels. Plus, we're triggering a no that rescues the other side sometimes too. And people feel good about that. And we're triggering a no that protects from loss. That's the biggest one. Protecting from the feeling of loss. There's some psychologists that believe that all our decisions are governed by where we're afraid of the loss. And other psychologists don't say all decisions, but they put the percentage extremely high. One way or the other, I know that fear of loss is a huge trigger. And I learned that in hostage negotiation, and we started to experiment with it in business negotiation. My classes are laboratories. MBA students, rising star business executives, on their way up, hungry, want to get better, negotiating real deals, from Wall Street to extremely expensive real estate in the Hollywood Hills.
So you're negotiating. Let's say you're on Wall Street, negotiating for a big salary bonus in your salary. What's a question to ask where the first response is no?
Do you want me to fail?
Do you want me to fail at this job?
Do you want me to move on? Do you want me to miss the opportunities where I can bring stuff to the table? It's ridiculous what people are willing to say no to. I mean, utterly absurd. Because when you say no, you've let yourself in for nothing. You've completely protected yourself. You can say no, I don't want you to fail, and feel like you haven't trapped yourself into anything because the horizon is now virtually open. You haven't agreed to anything. So no, of course I don't want you to fail. And
then you veer into you want to get them to say that's right as opposed to you're right.
Yeah, you want to start to summarize it from their perspective. You want to trigger some epiphanies. You want to start building out a structure based on a future success. A hostage negotiator says, I want to see you live through this. A business negotiator says, how can I be involved in critical projects that are necessary to the strategic future of the organization? That now completely reframes the conversation and also your positioning in it, because now if I'm responsible for your financial future, the success of it, now suddenly I like you. You're going to help me make more money. And also I've come to learn in the business sector that supervisors, employers see the people under them, unfortunately, as selfish people, because the only time a subordinate walks into my office is when he wants something from me. Subordinates don't walk into the boss's office and say, hey, boss, how can I help you today? Subordinate walks into the boss's office because I want a raise. I want more. I want this. I want that. And bosses are conditioned that the only time a subordinate walks into the office is when they're being very self-centered. And people don't see that. So as soon as you begin to start talking about the future together, now, and you helping yourself is by helping me. It's a different conversation.
And how do you distinguish between, how do you get them to say that's right versus you're right? So let's take the salary negotiation as an example.
It's a great question. The scary part of it, I've got to talk about it, how you see it emotionally in a way that almost talks you into it. So in a salary negotiation, I might say look, you work really hard. You work really hard to support me. I'm sure it's going to seem very ungrateful for me to come in and ask for more money. I'm sure it's going to seem short-sighted of me to look at the things that I've contributed and automatically think that entitles me to more money. Because that's what the guy is thinking. That's what the guy or gal above me is thinking. And they'll be startled like that. And they won't realize how much you've caught them off guard. And it's a combination of labeling the negatives, but from their perspective. And, I wish we had the science on this. I just know on a regular basis, from kidnappers in the Philippines to business people in Korea, I've had enough people do this across the world and trigger breakthrough in negotiations that I just know it works.
Well, I know in in Robert Cialdini's Influence and a lot of discussion of like copywriting and sales, addressing the negatives as quickly as possible is often a good technique, because if you kind of outsource the negatives to them, they're going to stop trusting you.
Right. Addressing it, and there's a critical distinction because it's our normal reaction to want to deny the negative. So to say, I don't want you to think. And I'm a big fan of Cialdini's stuff, and I've had the privilege of being on the same stage as him lecturing. I think he's a brilliant guy. And we studied Cialdini's stuff when I was a hostage negotiator because he talks about universal principles of human nature, and that's what hostage negotiation then takes these principles and basically instrumentalizes them. Here's a principle, now here's how you get it done. And you use a hostage negotiation skill, and both us and Cialdini have showed that because we're dealing with human beings, it doesn't matter if you're in the Philippines or in Korea or in Iraq. We're still human beings.
So I thought there was a good technique in your book, where you start you're talking money, but then you start to bring in the non-cash alternatives to sort of suggest that one part of the negotiation is done somehow, but there's still more to kind of squeeze out of this. So maybe you can elaborate a little more on that.
Well, yeah, and in the business world, we call it terms and conditions, and people are getting killed over terms and conditions. I'm talking to a huge multinational company, American-based, just the other day, and they're saying, yeah, we agree on a price, and it takes us 6 months to work through terms and conditions. And so these are the non-monetary things that are involved in the deal. And the sooner you get involved in understanding what those are and then draw those people in, because the lawyers on the other side are going to kill you with terms and conditions after you think you have a deal. And they're the deal killers. In the Philippines, we had deal killers that weren't involved in the negotiations. And in the United States, you got deal killers that are not involved in the negotiations. And the other side's corporate counsel are going to kill you over terms and conditions. And so the sooner you actually draw that into the process, the sooner you get the deal done. And that's why don't be in such a rush to get price, because you drop your guard and then you get worn out over terms and conditions and you give in to terms and conditions that'll destroy the deal for you.
Well, also it seemed like let's say you're negotiating salary and you say 150, the other side says 120. It seems like you could say, listen, 140 plus I also need a car or an extra week of vacation or something. It seems like bringing in the terms and conditions within the monetary discussion sort of kind of ends the monetary discussion for you in a good way.
Well, it can end it. I mean, you could, what makes 100 a good deal for you? 100 might be a great deal if it positions you for the 140 the next year, a significant jump subsequently on. So you're going to need title, you're going to need responsibility. Terms and conditions are, how am I successful here? And then the critical term and condition in a job deal is really latching yourself on to critical strategic projects for the future. Because what that does more than anything else, and I read an article today about knowing that you're being set up for promotion when you're suddenly being invited into meetings that you weren't invited into otherwise. The minute you're in critical projects for strategic future of a company, you now begin to get visibility with the highest levels of the company. Getting invited to the meetings that you weren't invited to otherwise. Or at least now the CEO knows your name. Who's working on this project that's critical to our strategic future? I need to know who they are, and I need to make sure that they're successful because my success is intertwined in it. And that really begins to change the job discussion and move you forward much quicker than a different title would, or a car would, or an expense account would, because you need the people at the top to be able to see you. And this short circuits that entire process.
Another technique you talk about is using sort of odd numbers, like, saying, okay, I want, because it makes it seem like you made this calculation. I want $143,957.31 because that seems to be the average of all the people in my industry with my job. Right. So coming with the specific numbers seems to be a good technique.
Right. Coming in with a specific number makes the other side think that there's a lot of thought into that number, and it's probably a rock-solid number. And it's far less negotiable if I were to say, I want $15,000 for this. No, I want $14,875. If I say $15,000, you're going to think that's an opening offer. If I say $14,875, you're going to see okay, wow, that has a lot of thought into it. Probably about 20% of the time you'll ask me for what backs that up, And then if I back it up, then we got a rock solid number.
Now, is this also a technique for determining if someone is lying to you?
Yes, absolutely. Asking for solid numbers and then asking if they backed it up is just really, it ties in other things with implementation and visioning and whether or not the numbers are good.
Like if you were in your FBI role, if you were interrogating somebody, how could you tell if they were lying to you?
I'm going to talk to them long enough where I know what they look like when they tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
You know, great law enforcement interrogator, and that's actually the way a polygraph works. You sit down for a polygraph and they tell you what the control questions are. What are the questions that, what's your name? What's your mother's name? What'd you have for breakfast? What did you do yesterday? Questions that you should tell me the truth on. And then if you start ducking and dodging, then I know that you never tell the truth. But I'll lay down a base of what you look like when you're telling the truth. That's all I need to know.
And what do you look for physically or in tone or whatever?
Right. And everybody's got a slightly different way of telling the truth. Generally, it's straight ahead eye contact. Generally, it's not looking away. Generally speaking, it's a downward inflecting tone like that. And generally, it's concise. When you know you're telling the truth, you think the truth is blatantly obvious, you're not going to try to back it up. There's what they say, the Pinocchio effect. The more words you use to try to convince me, you're lying. You're worried about it. You're going to try to add to it because you know it's a lie and you need to be convincing. That's the Pinocchio effect. More words, longer nose, more likely they're lying. When I'm telling the truth, and this is what a lot of people have trouble with, I'll get angry with you if you don't believe me. And if I do the American overseas, which is I just get louder and use the exact same words, that correlates highly, not 1,000%, but that's a good indicator of telling the truth. And more cases have been cracked with good interviewers, good interrogators, saying, all right, let's find out what he looks like when he's telling the truth. And then we're going to ask the hard questions. And if we get that look, if we get that form, we know he's telling the truth. If he looks away, if he does anything other than the affect of telling them the truth, we know he's lying.
So I guess with the negotiating, a similar thing happens. If they're saying they're going to kill the hostage or we're going to walk away from this deal, how do you then assess if they're telling the truth?
Change in tone of voice. I will have talked to him long enough. For me, the small talk is not just developing rapport, but getting a real bead on what you're like when you're relaxed and you're telling the truth. It's a faster way of figuring that out than spending 8 hours on a golf course with you. Because all the time you spend on a golf course, you see when a guy shades and when he doesn't, when he kicks the ball into the fairway, and whether or not, that's all the avenues for lying and telling the truth. I get it much faster in a conversation. My small talk is not focused as much on getting you to smile and laugh as just getting a good feel from what you look like when you're telling the truth. Now, when we get into this, if you make a threat and your threat is with a lot of words or change in tone of voice, then I know that you're threatening me. Specificity of the threat, whether or not you left yourself an out, the adjectives that you used, and a change in your tone of voice.
What's like adjectives? What do you mean by the adjectives you use?
Well, it might be, I'm ridiculously furious with you right now. Or to tell you the truth, I'm going to walk away from this deal. To be honest with you, I don't like the way this is going.
And so what does that mean?
Well, this is the first time you said to tell the truth or to be honest with you. That's the first time you brought that in. And it's a great tell. Because,
does that mean they're not going to be honest with me? They're not being honest with me right then? Or?
Well, what it means is I've been ducking and dodging up to this point in time. It means one of two things. I've been ducking and dodging all along, or when somebody says to be honest with you, it's also an indicator that I'm worried about how you're going to react to the next thing I say. And because I'm worried about it, I'm trying to settle you down a little bit. Now, either the next thing I'm going to say is going to be the blunt, hard truth, and nothing up to now has been, or the next thing I'm going to say is going to be a lie, and I've been telling you the truth so much, I'm now concerned about my lie, and again, I'm worried about the way you're going to react. And that's why you just keeping track of the conversation up to that point. That's a solid goal that Ned Coletti was talking about. That's a change. And so now I got to put it in context. And if I take my time and if I'm not in a hurry, then I can put it in context and I got a great feel for it.
So in business, I just want to take this one step further. In business, let's say someone says, to be honest with you, up to To be honest with you, given what you just said, I feel like walking away from the deal. Well, how would you respond to that if I said that?
To be honest with me,
I'm saying I'm negotiating with you.
that's how I'd respond.
Oh, I see.
Which I got you. I did a little bit of a mirror there, and you kept talking, and
Right.
we extended the conversation.
Right.
Got you back because you got me earlier. But that is exactly what my response would be. And I would say, to be honest with me, I've seen other people who've been very confrontative, and you might also say, look, I would hope that you would be honest with me. I would hope that you've been honest with me up to now. And then I gotta go silent. I gotta shut the front door. I have to shut up.
Silence is a critical technique as well.
Comfort with silence is a strength that a lot of people don't have. And it's enormously powerful. And I'm engaged in a negotiation with a very assertive lawyer who happened to be a woman. Didn't make any difference that she was a woman because a lot of men do this too. And she couldn't stand silence. A lot of men can't stand silence. And to get her to shut up and listen, and again, it had nothing to do with her gender. I asked her a no question because I didn't want her to feel out of control. And I said, did it ever occur to you to not talk? And she went dead silent, and to her credit, she said, no. But I stopped her dead in her tracks and made her think about what would happen if she didn't talk, which she was horrified by. But since the answer was no, she felt comfortable going dead silent when she'd said no, because she felt protected by saying no. And it was completely contrary, because she made great arguments, like lawyers do, make an argument, which means they feel out of control when they're not talking, which means when you go silent, if you want them to keep talking and keep talking till they give you that 90 seconds of solid gold, then just go silent on them. But since she was on my side of the table, I needed her to see the power in going silent herself, which she was very uncomfortable with.
Because, to your point, being silent allows you to get them to give you the 90 seconds of gold at some point.
Exactly.
So is there any technique? I didn't mention, and people should read your book for the Ackerman 6 Steps of Negotiating, because I thought that was a very interesting kind of step-by-step way to get to a price. But are there any critical things I'm missing here that are basic techniques in how you've done negotiation?
Well, I think it's real important to really let the other side talk first. So many people are so intent on making their argument and what they have to say, they're not going to hear a word that you say until they get theirs out anyway.
And how do you get them started? What's the best way?
First of all, more than likely, just see if they'll start on their own. The vast majority of preparation in the private sector is, how do we make our case? And so they're going to be dying to start. They're going to be dying for the first moment.
Let's say I'm selling a company. Okay, so I'm presenting my company to a bigger company.
Right.
They might get into we're all in the conference room, 3 people on my side, 3 people on their side. They might not even really know anything about me. They might start off and say, so what are we talking about here? How do I kind of get them talking more? Or maybe that's a case where I need to just, lay out the information.
Then I'd label that. I'd say, seems to me like you probably were really prepared for this moment.
That's funny.
And, a label will trigger it. What's in fact the case? Yes, they prepared. Yes, they have things they want to say. Yes, they're dying to get stuff off their chest. Yes, they're trying to make their points first. So if they've got enough self-control to try to wait for me to go first, but I know they're burning to have their say, then I'll use my innocent label and my late night FM DJ voice, and I'll say, my feel for this is that you put a lot of thought into this and you have some strong opinions. Mm-hmm. And then they're probably off to the races.
Anything else I thought the most powerful technique in the book that I hadn't really thought that much before was the calibrated questions, the how, and kind of outsourcing to them as much talking as possible. So there are any other, and the silence as well. So are there any other big kind of techniques I'm missing here?
Well, we've underscored stop trying to get the other side to say yes.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But that's huge. I mean, the minute you get out of that, you have a brand new negotiation. Because again, everybody else that talked to them that day has been trying to drag yes out of them, and then try to drag them into a trap with those yeses. And so the minute you stop doing that, you immediately are different. They immediately like you because they're not getting battered with trying to get a yes pulled out of them.
I think related to that, and you mentioned this in the appendix of your book, is putting together a kind of a preparation worksheet. And again, you even say don't fetishize about it, but I can picture in my mind being confused in the moment, but maybe preparing in advance. Okay, here's what I'm going to ask to get to a no, initially, or here's what I'm going to ask to label, or here's what I'm going to ask to, here are the how questions I can ask. I can see putting together that worksheet in advance is important preparation.
Right. And it's a minimal amount of preparation. It doesn't take that much. Maybe you need 3 to 5 how and what questions. No more than that. In advance, 3 to 5 labels to trigger conversation, to keep things going. The other thing about those two things is like stretching before a big game. If you've thought a couple of them up in advance, then you've loosened up your mental agility to come up with the perfect label or the perfect how or what question in the midst of the conversation.
I feel like you should be like a couples therapist. Like you could be, one side could say something you could mirror it, like the last 3 things they say, and the other side could say something. You say, how does she do that? And all you have to do is just use these techniques back and forth to get a whole dialogue going between the couple.
I got a conversation from a C-level Silicon Valley executive female woman. Yeah, forgive me for stumbling over the characterization the other day, and she says, "My fiance bought your book. And I so love talking to him now because he's no longer trying to only solve my problem. We have actual conversations." So yeah, it works in relationships too.
That's funny. That could be your next book. All right. Well, thanks so much. Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Great book. I've read it now several times over. I'm so happy you came on the podcast. I don't know where you must have flown in to come on the podcast. Like, I really like to do these things in person like this.
Oh, you're absolutely
really
worth it, man. You're a superstar. I mean, so many people are coming to you for solid advice on how to move their business and personal lives forward. So it's an honor to come on the podcast with you.
Well, you just won this negotiation. Thank you very much. Thanks.
For more from James, check out the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network at jamesaltucher.com and get yourself on the free insiders list today.
Hey, thanks for listening. Listen, I have a big favor to ask you, and it will only take 30 seconds or less, and it would mean a huge amount to me. If you like this podcast, please let me know. Please let the team I work with know. Please let my guests know, and you can do this easily by subscribing to the podcast. Probably the biggest favor you could do for me right now, and it's really simple. Just go to iTunes, search for The James Altucher Show, and click subscribe. Again, it will only take you 30 seconds or less, and if you subscribe now, it will really help me out a lot. Thanks again.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.